This is the UX Ladder Conversations Beyond Pixels, a deep dive into product cultures, inclusion, and the untold stories that shape experiences and trends. Hello, Maroun. Hi,
Hello.
I'm introducing Maroun Najjar, Head of Design at Patch, a company building the infrastructure for the carbon market. He looks after the brand and product design team. Before that, he worked in fintech and health and fitness space. But beyond that, I want to say a little bit more about Maroun because Maroun is one of the most multifaceted designers, visionary leaders, and also fearless adventurers I've ever met. Maroun, your talents extend beyond the realm of design. You're a seasoned mountain climber, globe-trotter, and you're also fluent in multiple languages, which is so impressive. Your adventures are nothing short of epic. I will say sometimes when you've told me about your adventures, they're a little bit stressful because from a grueling 20-day hike through Tibet, I know you've also trekked through Kyrgyzstan, where your brother may or may not have cried and said, this is terrible, and then loved it, to motorcycling across Vietnam, and not once but twice inadvertently, illegally, that is, crossing into China. And, that's all this to say is that, Maroun, when you commit to something, you go deep, right? Like, so for instance, your profound knowledge about sleep, included lucid dreaming, has been a personal revelation. Like, I had no idea I was lucid dreaming till you told me about it. Um, and I want to point out also is, and this just goes into how multifaceted you are as a human, which I so appreciate and respect. Beyond your professional and adventurous pursuits, you are also a passionate coffee aficionado, reader, as well as writer. So my first question for you today, Maroun, is where did your travels take you last?
First of all, Mariam, thank you so much for the kind words. Borders can be fuzzy and hard to notice at times, which is how you end up
Yeah.
crossing them over. But anyways, I'm super excited to be here. So most recently, I actually went back to Nepal with my fiance. It was
Congratulations.
Thank you. We did a 20-day hike together. Upon proposing, post proposal, I was like, we need to do this before the wedding. This is such an important place to me, and it was beautiful to share that with her. It was a lot of fun.
That's amazing. And you took her on a grueling trek and she didn't run for the hills. She's a
She
keeper.
did so great. She was trekking in front of me, and so yeah, it was lovely.
Amazing. I also have to ask before we, get into some of your professional background, are you still indulging in Turkish coffee before your venti Starbucks? I gotta know.
I've toned down the venti to a grande, but everything else still stands.
Okay, so just so we're clear here,
Moderation, you know.
you're still doing Turkish coffee, which would give most people jitters, and it's delicious. And then you have a grande Starbucks.
Yes, especially if it's like
Amazing.
a Tuesday or a Wednesday, you know. Some
I
days where you kind of need that second
I
cup.
I feel it. Love it. You'll have to also tell me maybe offline about some of your recent top coffee spots because I've gone back to a couple you've recommended over the years and they've always been so good. All right. So all that
For
said,
sure,
let's
yeah.
dig into your design journey. Tell me about your journey into UX design. Where did it start?
Yeah, so it actually started in the sixth grade, but I don't really think I realized it. I grew up, I was a huge geek. I was obsessed with the future. I was obsessed with science fiction, and I was obsessed with video games. A lot of sixth graders are. And there was a day where I realized, and this was like a pretty profound day for me, but I realized that video games were made by other people, and
Mm,
I was a person, and that I could learn how to make them. And so I actually started designing my own video games, and building these
wow.
fantasy worlds. And that is like the first thing I designed. Moving from that, my father is an engineer. My grandfather was a famous civil engineer in Lebanon. I don't know what my
Mm,
great grandfather did, but he probably was also an engineer. And so, as the firstborn son, it was, I don't want to say I was forced into engineering, but there was definitely a strong tipping of the scales in that direction.
yeah.
And I loved science and I loved the creativity that comes with engineering. And so, I studied engineering in college, but very quickly on felt like it was missing something. And so I wanted to make things, I wanted to work in the future, and I found a job as a PM intern at the age of 19. And while working there, the person whose job I envied the most was the UX designer's job. That person was actually sitting there and crafting and making the experiences that we move people through. And I didn't pursue it because I couldn't draw and my handwriting was terrible. And so I thought, I can't enter design, as a lot of folks do. And it took a graphic design teacher to sort of look at me and say, "What are you talking about? You can't draw. Look at what you can make in Illustrator or Photoshop. Drawing has nothing to do with it." And that really was sort of like what opened up the world for me. So after that job, I got a job as a UX research intern, working my way to the UX designer, but taking one step on my way there. And then I conducted research for 6 months. And at the same time, I probably was not the best researcher because I'd come back with the responses and the research I'd done, but be extremely opinionated around how we should solve them, and provide the designer with a list of suggestions, mostly because I wanted to be doing that job. And it wasn't until after college that I got my first job in UX design as a product designer.
That's a really good story. I will throw in though, I have seen you research and you're pretty good. So cut yourself some slack.
Thank you.
But I do have some questions on the last bit you said, but I want to skip back and where you talked about how you're, you have a whole line of engineers. But the thing is, UX isn't traditionally a field POC parents push for, right?
Yeah.
I've asked a few folks this question, and the struggle is real. Like to date, my parents have no idea what I do. I've tried to explain it, but then the question is, why don't you work in big tech? Well, so given more traditional expectations, and in your case, especially engineer, how did your parents react when you made that switch?
Yeah, so they have always been deeply supportive, but they also like I think like most Lebanese parents really value doctors, really value engineers, lawyers, etc. And so when I graduated and told them that I was looking for work as a product designer, I remember my mom especially being deeply concerned that the word engineer wasn't in it. And being really worried that I, had spent not only all this time, but all this money on this degree, and I wasn't going to use it. They always were supportive of me, and candidly, it really took until I received my first offer letter as a product designer, um, where they sort of looked in that and were basically like, okay, a career can be made out of this. For a while after that, my mom did think that I worked for Apple designing the apps on people's phones, which wasn't far off. I never worked for Apple, but I did design apps. And so it really took until I landed that first job and they understood the fact that there was an industry here, that I was deeply passionate about it. And until we sort of like got through the engineering hump, if you will.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And especially if I do think there's a lot of expectation of the firstborn child, to your point. I'm a third child. By the time it came to me, my parents were pretty tired and like, whatever. But my sister, like, I know she wanted to be a painter, and they said, over our collective dead bodies. Okay. So tell me more about this first product design job. Were you good at it? What were some things from there that stuck with you?
Yeah, so it was at a meditation company called 10% Happier. I I was terrible at it. I was really bad, but I was obsessed. I like really wanted to be good at it. And so, designing the first screen of an onboarding flow would take me 2 days of 10 hours of work. And even then I would look at it and be like, this still does not look good or accomplish the goal. And I don't really know why. And I've spent so much time on it. But in that obsession, I really focused on becoming good and on getting the reps in. And so I was lucky enough to work for another product designer who also happened to be a design educator. And so outside of work, he would assign me homework every week. I'd come back and design posters for him. He'd critique them. He really helped me hone, especially the visual side of the skill set. And then the other thing I did is I spent a lot of time reading and listening to interviews with just other creatives. And in that time is when I came across Ira Glass's advice around taste and skill and how everybody possesses taste. It can be further developed, but you have a certain amount of taste in you. And skill is what you need to put time in to have it match your taste, which is why when you start, everything you make looks terrible and you know it, but you can't make it better. You haven't developed that skill. And that for me, like really opened up a whole world of, understanding that I just needed to put the time in to bring my work up to the taste that I had, while also nourishing that taste by being inspired by others' works, kind of museums, etc. And so I was pretty
Mhm.
terrible for that first year, but I was obsessed. I spent weekends on it, and it was a really really fun time in my life.
Um, I love what you just said about taste and skill because you're right. There's nothing. Most things can be achieved, but it's clearly your diligence that paid off. You clearly persevered. In that you're currently at Patch now, where you're head of design for a platform that accelerates climate solutions. And just to share more about that, what I was going all over the Patch, LinkedIn as well as your website. And what you all do is so interesting. Like you're enabling organizations to efficiently manage, sell, and buy carbon credits with transparency and rigor. And you're currently managing 400 million tons of carbon. Tell us more about not just Patch, but also about your work there and your personal interest in climate work.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, I realized that everything that I read and listened to was climate change related. I also realized that a lot of my travels were at a backdrop of climate change. I was going to these places because I didn't believe that they would be around for my children in the same way that I would get to experience them. And it sort of like slowly grew within me that I needed to work on climate change, that I actually like needed to just focus in and say no to everything else. And so I joined Patch as the founding designer. I was the seventh employee. It had always been my goal to build a design practice and a design department from the ground up. To start as the only designer to figure it out, and it was very intense. And we figured it out. We learned a lot, and to build a design practice. And so that's sort of what brought me to Patch and the interest behind why I joined initially.
That's huge. What was it like being the founding designer, especially in an industry which, in a sense, design-wise, was new to you, right? Because before this, you had a very diverse experience as far as industry is concerned. How did you go deep? What were your learnings? Because you've obviously grown and you've grown a team, which is congrats for that. That's amazing, and
Thank you.
no one better than you could have done it. Tell us more about that piece. Like, what was it like to grow it?
Yeah, it was. So when I first joined, there were three things I needed to just immerse myself in. The first one is I needed to learn about carbon removal and carbon credits and understand, what is this capability, these technologies that we are trying to develop, we are trying to fund to enable the planet to pull carbon back out of the atmosphere and put it back into balance. And so my lunches, my evenings were spent reading about different carbon removal technologies, all of the terms that come with the industry, what was reliable, what is less reliable, et cetera. It was a lot of work, but it was also so much fun. Like I just had so much interest in the
Yeah,
topic that I
yeah,
really, really enjoyed diving into that. And then the other two
yeah.
things were, when you first, so I was the first designer. There had been some consultants before, but I joined with quite a backlog of design work that needed to take place. The main focus was the product work. We had, upon accepting my offer a month before I joined, I was asked if I could design a feature for Facebook for this big deal that we were working on with them. Um, that deal never materialized, but upon accepting the offer, downloaded Figma, set up the Figma account for the company, and got to work. Um, and what I really sort of quickly came to understand, I think, was three main things. So the first is uh, design at that stage can have a massive effect, not just on the product, but on the brand and on closing deals. And deals were the lifeblood of a startup. Trying to build that momentum, getting a new logo onto the website, all of that in the early days is so important to just like put the work in to get some of those wins and have those build on each other. And so each week I tried to focus on how am I contributing to the product and the brand at the 10,000 foot level? Am I setting up the right systems? Am I thinking about the overall user journey that we're trying to build towards, et cetera? But also, have I delivered value today? Did I hop on a call with a
Mm,
salesperson and just like design their deck and clean up their deck and make them look that much more professional, right? Did I conduct user research? And as part of that user research, was used in the sales process to help close a deal or make a customer feel heard. And so the first year was a lot of just trying to focus in on delivering value every day while also pushing that 10,000-foot vision. And then the other reality of it is a grind. It was extremely long hours. It was a lot of working weekends. Um, but I loved it. Like it, and that's how I knew it was the right place for me, right? Like I would wake up on a
Yeah.
Sunday and be excited to have football on and work through some exciting project that I was working on. And so until I started building out the rest of the team, that was really what the first year was like. Yeah.
How has your journey been? And thank you for sharing that. It's so true, right? So much of it is a grind, but to love what you do, that's so key to doing that grind. And the fact that you
Mhm.
got up and were excited about solving different problems, love that. How has the transition been for you? Because I personally did this as well, where I went from designer to design manager, and especially in a small company, there's operations you're dealing with as well as your what what would be described as player coach, but you're also like doing all of the strategic stuff. How do you
Mhm.
balance all of that? And how is the transition from designer to mostly managing been for you?
Yeah, I've really, really loved it. At first, so I hired very quickly on, I brought on a brand design consultant and then hired our first brand designer. That is an area that I did not have much experience in, and I quickly needed to like just bring an expert in to take on. Um, and early on, when it came to hiring in a brand designer and working with a visual designer, what I like really tried to focus on was understanding as a in an area where like I can't contribute as much as I can on the product design side. How can I set
Mm-hmm.
up this person for success? How can I make sure I'm providing the right amount of like pressure and ambition, but also making sure I'm helping shape the work in the right way while letting them do their thing. And so that was something I needed to learn very, very quickly with the brand designer. I then hired two product designers because we were launching three different product lines very, very quickly. And, it really felt like a sliding scale. At first, I brought on the other two product designers. I was doing still a lot of playing. I was still leading on like two or three features at once while also starting to manage these folks to get a sense
Oh wow.
of how they work, et cetera. And 2 or 3 months in, I had this pretty strong realization that I was slowing everyone down. It was like, actually, in trying to continue to push this work forward, we're getting lower quality work because the schedule, the things that I'm doing no longer allow me to just like do really great product design work. And also I've hired some phenomenal people that I look up to and I need to be empowering them. And so there was a very deliberate moment of me trying to deliberately hand things off to folks as quickly as possible. There's a little bit of trust that comes with that, right? Where,
Yeah.
you trust them to just take it on and take it forward. And at that point, I moved into much more of a coach role, which I've been in since for the last 2 years.
Good. You're such a great mentor. I've seen you over the years mentor other people,
Thank you.
and I've personally learned so much from you as well. It, I do think there's a lot to be said about giving, in a sense, your baby away. Like this was your vision, and you brought it to life, and to have that trust, that's a lot of growth, and good for you for realizing it so soon because it's hard, because you have a certain vision, like, do I really want to give it away? So that's amazing.
Thank
Um,
you. Thanks.
I want to step back a little bit to when you were talking about carbon credit and what it
Mhm.
means to release it back and all of that. Just, educate me. Tell me, as far as your impact in this work has been, what feels most gratifying to you, and why? Specifically with Patch.
And within the industry
Yeah,
specifically, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think there are two things that come to mind. So the first one is we've built a really strong brand and presence in the space. And that brand we are using to essentially try to make it feel so we're removing something that is invisible in the atmosphere, right? And so when we sell a carbon credit, we're selling you this invisible thing. There is no in some cases I can show you the tree, but in other cases you can't, right? It's an invisible atom. And so the power of design and the power of our brand is to make that feel real, to make our customers understand the
Mm,
impact that they're having on the planet, especially
yeah.
right now when we are very much in the early days, where the people who purchase carbon credits are pioneers. They're helping funnel finance into these solutions to get us going to the scale that we need to reach. And so I'm deeply proud of the brand that we've built. It is a brand that I think we have tried to strike the balance of feeling really authoritative and like we are experts, which we are, but also that is optimistic. That shows the
Mm,
like beauty of the planet that we are trying to rebalance and keeps that
yeah.
front and center in our visual language. Um, because if you were to search climate change on any news website, the imagery is very different than that. Right? It is of destruction and of a world where you have to sacrifice a lot more that feels like
Mm,
it's shrinking. And we don't think that that's not the case. And we don't think that that is the world that we're trying to build, so that the world that will be built. So I think
mm.
that's one of the things I'm the most proud of in terms of, yeah, what we built on the brand side.
Thank you for sharing that. You're so right, right? Like it's easy to forget about things that you don't physically see or interact with, and to give that a vision makes it so much more real. And so, stepping one step further back, when you were talking about your travels and how you've seen climate change firsthand, can you share an experience where it was very startling to you, but wow, I see this right here? Because I feel like, you and I still live in the Bay Area, and there's certain areas in which there isn't as much awareness or care when it comes to climate change. Or they still live in a world where people think it's all made up. Where have you seen it that really stuck with you?
Yeah, there are two sort of really distinct moments. The first one was I was backpacking on an island just north of Antarctica, just south of Chile. And the backpacking trip was supposed to be around this mountain range with a really, really stunning glacier. But instead of a glacier, I was there all by myself. All I found was mud, a lot of mud that I
Oh
had to
my
trek through,
God.
a lot of overgrown bushes. There was no glacier left whatsoever. And it wasn't until I got back into town on that small island where, in speaking with the folks there, I realized how not only how much things had changed, but also that they had changed in the last 3 years, and that they weren't
Yeah.
going to go back to what it was, and that the flora, the
Yeah.
fauna, all of it was shifting really, really rapidly. And I think I was in I think my mid-20s at the time, and that's when I had this realization that this sadness that my children wouldn't get to see that. And
Yeah.
so that was the first moment. And the other one, which I think is a really common experience for a lot of folks in the Bay Area, was the fires of 2020 and the orange
Yeah.
skies
Oh my
right
God.
in the
Yeah.
heart of COVID, where you feel like you
Yeah.
couldn't breathe, you couldn't go outside. Yeah, that was the other
Yeah.
like big moment.
Yeah. I remember that orange sky. It was like waking up on in an alternate reality. It was crazy. Thank you
Hmm.
for sharing that, because climate change is very real. I'm from originally from Pakistan, and I go back to visit family every year, and it is hotter and hotter
Hmm.
every year, and you see it firsthand in all of these places. I'm really proud of you for trying to do something about it. Thanks for sharing that. I know that must have been a really difficult thing to recount, because it must have been a super sad moment.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the stories that we try to, this isn't necessarily our story to tell, but it is a part of our brand, is the world of the future doesn't need to be this scary one where the planet is burning and ecosystems are dying. Like,
Mm,
this is very much within our control, and we have done a lot of great things on the path towards a world of abundance, right?
yeah.
A world where you live in harmony with the climate is a world where you drive an electric car that's a lot more pleasant than a gas car. It's a world where you don't have to use gas to heat your home. Like, there are better things. This future is going to be exciting and better and more abundant and more, I think, equitable and widespread. And
Mm.
that is the story that isn't getting told, but that needs to get told. But we need to realize that climate change is here, right? And we've got to work towards that future. It's not just going to come to us.
Thank you for saying that, because so much of it ends up being like, oh, this is just fear mongering, or people get super scared. I actually
Mhm.
have people in my life that get so depressed about it, they don't want to leave the house. I'm like, everything is terrible. But you're right. I love that. I'm actually going to, keep that in mind, that it is in our control to make this better.
Mhm.
It is fixable. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, that, I mean, I know for me, it makes me feel a lot lighter. Okay, let's go back a little bit to how you UX.
Mhm.
I would love to learn, what is one thing you've learned in your work in the last year, whether as a manager or as a coach, player, whatever, that really stands out to you in terms of how people work together?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think one of the lessons I've learned, especially in the last year, is that so I'd always believed that one, diverse perspectives lead to more creative, more powerful outcomes. And that two, in order to really get to those outcomes, you needed to create a very safe, inclusive, kind of silly, kind of fun place for people to do their work. I think the new thing that I've learned in the last year is that pressure can actually be a really, really powerful way to also drive really phenomenal outcomes. And so, in learning that, what I've learned is that people experience either pressure or motivation in different ways. And so, as a manager, you really need to understand, what drives the folks that are on your team. What do they get excited about? Do they like a very tight deadline where they feel like their back is against the wall and they need to figure it out? Do they connect more to the potential outcome of their work and the good that it can do, right? And so I think one of the things in the last year that I've learned is how do I continue to tie the work that the folks on my team are doing back to the way that they are wired, the way that they like to do their best work, to create that environment for really great design work. And that's opened up, I think, a just a new way for us to really be executing at Patch.
Thank you. So, I'm thinking, this is making me think about what you as a designer and a design leader, what principles are important to you, and tell me if I've missed anything. But it sounds like inclusive environments,
Mhm.
um, work with and be sort of adept to different work styles of people, but then also be inspiring and think about the real lives of people, right? Because it can't just be about work. You have to like come together as a team and all of that. Is there anything you would add to that in terms of how you lead and design?
Um, yeah, I think one of the core tenets of my role and what I bring to the team is ensuring that design is good for the business and great design equals great business outcomes. And I think that's something that designers can shy away from sometimes. But at the end of the day, as a designer, you have unbelievable power to shape the outcomes of the business
Yeah.
that you work at, right? And so whether I am showing up for crit or in one-on-ones, reviewing work, one of the things that I need to make sure I'm constantly doing is tying it back to what problem are you solving? Why is that important, not just for the business, but for our clients, for the people we work with, and ensuring I'm driving focus on the team across the board, using that as one of the core sort of like pillars or magnets in the feedback that I give.
I love how you're thinking about the business as well as creating psychologically safe places for your team, in which you're encouraging them, like, hey, here's this new thing to learn, but I've also got you.
Mhm.
That shows amazing management skills. So thanks for sharing that. You know, I'm really eager to also learn about the work environments you worked with. Tell me about, like, describe the best team you've worked with. You don't have to name them if you don't want to, but what I'm really interested to know is what made them stick with you? Why were they so great? And what was so memorable about them?
Yeah, so I think the I, I'm extremely biased, but the team that we've built at Patch and that we have now is a team that I'm very biased because I hired all the folks, but I am every day I show up to work grateful that I even get a seat and that I even just get to be in the room. And I think the reason there are a couple of reasons for that. So the first is we've hired just some phenomenal folks who come from very different backgrounds and different not just different work backgrounds, but just different life backgrounds. And what that means is while everyone is a very strong, very senior designer, people spike in different ways. We've got someone who is phenomenal at design systems. We have someone else who understands what is the latest and greatest and state of the art of UX work out in the market. And what this does is this brings this really like exciting environment where we are learning from one another. We know how to push each other, and the work is better because we are all there than it would be if you were working just in your own vacuum. And then the second piece, and this one, this is something I learned from when we worked together back at Earnest, but we have extremely close brand and product design teams, right? Our crits are
Nice.
shared, our weekly rituals are shared, and so the brand impacts the product, right? All the values we spoke about around optimism,
Yeah.
trustworthiness, et cetera, that is injected into the product itself. It's a competitive
Yeah.
advantage of the product itself. And because the teams sit so closely together, we're able to drive that.
I love that you said that. And first of all, I applaud you for always being so articulate. Like you always pull stuff out, but you're so right. It's so important for the product visual story and the brand visual story to be in cohesion.
Mhm.
And kudos to you, biased or not, kudos to you for driving that at Patch. It's amazing. Um,
Thank you.
I'm going to shift us a little bit to learned experiences, if I may. I'm really curious about how your background might have influenced over how you approach work in life. In essence, what I'm looking for is I'd love for you to share where you get your superpowers. Is there an experience that has stuck with you in terms of the work you do, or in terms of how diligent you are, or how you go deep into something, or how passionate you are? You're clearly a very passionate person for more than one thing. Um, Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think they both go back to my dad. The first is uh, very early on. So that moment I spoke about with learning that video games I made are made by humans just by like me. What my dad drove in me really early on, our house is filled with books, and those books are on. There's a lot of like those something for dummies books, some topic for dummies books. And so the house is filled with books of a bunch of different topics. And he has a very like wide-ranging fascination with the world. And what that drove in me was this understanding that, all of the people I admired. And so when I was in high school, it was people like Johnny Ive and Steve Jobs and the great designers of Silicon Valley. Um, those are things that I can learn, and that if I am willing to put in the hard work for them, I can learn those things as well. And this has been especially true on this founding designer at a head of design journey as well, where a lot of times not only are you working hard, but you're feeling a lot of imposter syndrome. You're looking at
Hmm.
other founding designers who have scaled to become head of designs, and you're like, there's a lot of imposter
Yeah.
syndrome there that you have to learn to sit with. That's the first one is just like if you're interested enough and willing to put the work in, you can learn any topic and build any skill within yourself. The second one is, we moved to the US when I was about 8 years old. My parents spoke some English, but had to learn quite a bit. And my dad, still does this to this day, but he wakes up at 5 a.m. and he works from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I grew up watching that and just understanding the like his dream had always been to come to this country and build a life for his family here. And I not only feel the privilege and the like weight of what he did to get us here, but that also showed me that, that this is a phenomenal place to be, but hard work is a requirement of accomplishing great things. And so that is the other lesson I think that has been especially important over this last year, where sometimes, it's just you've got to put in the long hours and find your excitement within them. There is no shortcut to the places that you're going.
I'm going to get a little bit personal here, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
Has being a person of color or someone with an uncommon name, or even your identity as an immigrant or a minority, has this had an effect on how you work and live life?
Yeah, I think one of the realizations I had, I think my second internship, is that my name and my culture and the experiences that I've lived are not things to keep to the side and shy away from. They're actually things to be not only deeply proud of and to share, but they are almost a superpower, right? Like I think my literal definition of creativity is the ability to make connections in between dots. And the lived experience I have, the visits around the world, the family that I come from, I have a different set of dots than others do, and I can make different connections than others do. And this is This is
Yeah.
also true, and my philosophy around building a phenomenal design team is you really want like diverse perspectives just lead to better outcomes. And so I learned that early on. And you've heard this countless of times. I do have to introduce myself as Maroon, like the color or that band. I prefer the color. I say that almost every day of my life. There is still,
Yeah.
it's an unusual name. It's an unusual background, but it is one that I'm so grateful for and deeply proud of,
Yeah.
and has led to even better work in my life.
That's just really, yeah, I love that because you're right. It's be proud of who you are and keep it at the forefront because you're right. How you connect your dots coming from different lived experiences absolutely affect everything. So why sideline
Mhm.
it? Let's broaden this conversation to the larger UX field. When it comes to representation, race, gender, identity, immigration status, however you want to define it, do you see this at work as well as the larger UX across design, writing, research?
I absolutely do. I think there's been a lot of progress made on this. And I think part of that is driven by like that just leads to better outcomes. And so for having a team and a company that is staffed with diverse perspectives can really like just is better for business as a starting point. And so I think we've made a lot of progress. There's
Yeah.
always more work to be done. There's always more doors to hold. And so we've got a lot more work to do, but even just within the last 12 years of my career, I feel like the teams that I've been on have only gotten more diverse, which has been really lovely.
That's really good to hear. So, in terms of your outlook on the industry, in terms of representation, do you think it's headed in a positive direction where it's starting to get more diverse?
I think so. I think we're headed in the right direction. But there's more work to be done.
What do we need? What are your thoughts in terms of the work to be done? What could we be doing?
Yeah, so I think getting into UX today is much harder than it was when I was getting started. There are a lot more people trying to get in. Finding a way to stand out is even harder. And then for someone who, is coming from, I don't want to say necessarily out from a different country, but just from like a different background, it can seem even more daunting than it is. And I know I felt this. I didn't have a blueprint for how to do this. And so I think making sure that there are enough doors open, that there's enough demystifying and support that's provided, especially for early career designers, I think to me is one of the largest areas of opportunity for our field.
I really appreciate your conversation around holding the door for future UX. As you've mentioned it a few times, what does this mean for you on a personal level?
Yeah, I think on a personal level, it means so for me, I've tried to spend a good amount of time not only just talking about my experience and the imposter syndrome I felt every step of the way, and trying to normalize that. But I think it also means like making the time to have one-on-ones, to respond to cold
Mm.
messages. Some of the most impactful things I learned early on and people I met just responded to a 19-year-old kid's message on LinkedIn. And so I think that's something that is important to carry forward. And yeah, so that's one of the principles I try to live by and I try to embody.
Thank you for saying that. Like trying to really bring it out in your professional life. I feel like a strong theme that you're mentioning again and again is mentorship. Like be available to talk to people, help them when you can, give advice. Am I getting the right gist?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as someone who, what I do is I coach and I manage people and I set strategic direction for the design team. But that is something that can be done also outside of work and to help
Yeah.
provide folks with at least personally what I've found the most useful is when I speak to people who are a couple steps ahead of me. So today that means head of designs at companies that are several stages beyond us who have maybe walked the road that I'm currently walking a couple of years ago. And I think what I try to do is to just offer that for folks who are just starting off as founding designers or even just trying to get into the UX field.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So tell me about, let's talk a little bit about that. I want to push in there because you work in a lot of industries and have deep knowledge across them. And you're also a leader in a fast growing field. Like more and more people are interested in climate work, more and more
Mhm.
designers are trying to enter it. What is a piece of advice you feel that's important to share with folks entering the field for the first time?
Yeah, so I think this is this is going to be counter to some advice that is set out there, but the one piece I would say is become obsessed with the tools. So there's a lot of advice out there that says the tools don't matter. What matters is your approach, your process, etc. That's true, but I've found that some of the best designers, especially when you are entering a field and you have this unbelievable superpower of your fresh eyes, of your like initial perspective on things, you have this ability to really learn what the latest tools are and what they enable you to do. This is even more exciting in the world of AI that live in today, and the all of the augmentation that's possible. And I've found that some of the greatest designers are those who just like really geek out on tools and really go
Mm,
deep and try to shape like what is the next wave of the future for UX principles, for UI. And so I think that's one thing that I would personally like to push back on the
yeah.
industry advice. I think tools are they are
Yeah.
a step towards towards really building a successful career, I think.
I think that makes sense. As an individual contributor, you also have to bring the vision to life, right? Like if you're
Mhm.
in there pushing pixels, you've got another tool. Is there anything in addition to that you'd say to folks who are looking for work right now, right? Like given all the layoffs and given how hard the industry has been, is there anything else that you would say to that?
Yeah, I think this is something that I think is it's a least traveled path, but something I would love to push people to consider, which is look for a startup, look for a very small company that like needs more design horsepower. This is something
Mm,
that, early on I really felt at Patch, and there's a lot of the power of joining a really small company is that you're given, by definition, you're given a very wide scope, and that can be
yeah.
really scary and really daunting. But at the same time, there's no better environment for learning and for learning really, really quickly. And so I think that would be my biggest recommendation is look for a startup. The way that you would do that is take some time to understand who has raised money recently, who has maybe hired their
Mm,
first or second designer, reach out to those teams, to the people who lead those teams, explain what you're good at, start off with a strong pitch, and really try to look for those companies on top of the larger organizations that maybe do have a little more structure and support available for early career folks. I do
yeah.
think there is this other path available, especially if you're hungry and you're willing to learn, you're willing to put the work in on your
Yeah.
own.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. One more question in terms of in the same theme, which is a piece of advice that you feel is important to share it. Is there anything you would call out in the same theme separately for underrepresented communities?
Um, I think, yeah, I think it would be use your perspective and use your background as a superpower. Lead with it. Don't hide it.
Yeah.
It truly is. It is something that only you, truly only you, can bring to the table, can bring to an organization or to a team. Use that. Show the world why it's special, and really, really lean into it.
So well said. I'm going to write that down. Thank you for that. Okay, we're getting to the end here. And at the end, I do want to acknowledge that working in tech is hard, right? Like you've spoken through this conversation about the grueling hours or like the learning curve, as well as bringing in learned experiences. It's also really challenging in terms of the ups and downs of the world, right? Like the economy isn't great, so many layoffs, and so on and so forth. All of that said, though, you're clearly still not only growing as a human, but growing as a leader and you keep increasing your knowledge. So tell me, what keeps you going?
Yeah, I think I am deeply grateful that I get to work on in climate, on a problem I care really deeply about. I'm deeply grateful that the people at Patch and the people on my team are all extremely passionate about what we do. It makes the atmosphere electric. It makes it intense, but it makes it really fulfilling. Um, and then when things get really hard or I get really tired, I go out into nature with my partner. We get in a tent for a weekend and that always centers me. It brings me back to literal worlds that we are trying to make some good in. And so, yeah, those are the things that just I'm excited about every day and grateful that I get to experience.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for spending the last 40 or so minutes with me. Maroun, again, you're amazing. And I only wish the best for you also. Congrats on the upcoming wedding. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So grateful.
Thank you so much, Mariam. It was a pleasure to do this with you. And in my career when we worked together, I have learned so much from you in a lot of ways at Patch. I when I didn't know what I was doing, I would ask myself, well, what would Mariam do at this moment? And use that as a guiding light. And so I'm deeply grateful for you and the impact you've had on my career and on my life. And this was a lot of fun. So thank you for having me.
That means a lot. You're amazing. Thanks for listening to the UX Ladder, Conversations Beyond Pixels, created by Mariam Khan, music by Ben Ewing.